Since 2023, Peter Welch has served as the junior United States Senator from Vermont. A member of the Democratic Party, he was Vermont's representative in Congress from 2007 to 2023. U.S. Senator Peter Welch was first elected to the Vermont State Senate in 1980. Within 5 years, he was unanimously elected by his colleagues to lead the chamber, becoming the first Democrat in Vermont history to hold the position of President pro tempore. He's led on legislation to advance green technologies, bring down the cost of prescription drugs, expand broadband and telemedicine in rural America, and so much more. When he's not working, Senator Welch can be found hiking and skiing around Vermont with his wife, Margaret, and also enjoying the Green Mountain State's uniquely beautiful nature. It is an honor to connect with U.S. Senator Peter Welch today to talk about his work in Vermont and Washington, D.C. My name is Jordan Hayden, and this is Vermont's Voice.
Well, Senator, thank you so much for sitting down with me today here at the CCTV office in Burlington, and welcome to Vermont's Voice.
It's good to be here.
It's good to have you. And I just want to note that I'm fully aware you've got a very busy schedule today, so we are going to be very conscious of your time, and I just want to share that I am so grateful that you chose to carve out some of that time for this conversation today.
Well, you know what, I'm really grateful to VPIRG and all the work you're doing, especially this summer, getting around knocking on doors and doing the important grassroots work of democracy. So the pleasure and honor is mine.
Oh, well, that warms my heart, and I so appreciate you starting with that because that's actually where I wanted to start this conversation. I guess I don't need to ask you if you've heard about our summer canvas because it sounds like you have. And Democracy Summer actually just wrapped up literally this week. And as you mentioned, we went door to door. We knocked on doors in every single part of the state. And we even got 16,000 Vermonters signed on to take a pledge to protect our democracy. So as you know, that's no small feat. We're pretty proud of that. But at the same time, we are fully aware that Trump is working to undermine democracy at pretty much every turn, and that also includes the recent news of him trying to make it more difficult for certain folks to be able to get out to vote. You're well aware of that. And so I'm curious to know, how important is it for Vermonters to get out to stand up for democracy, whether that's locally, nationally, or both?
Incredibly important. And you know, we have traditionally been able to take basic tenets of democracy for granted. We'd be fighting about what's the right healthcare policy, or what's the right environmental policy, or what's the right tax policy, things that are really, really important. But we were always doing it in a context where we had confidence that our vote would be cast and our vote would be counted. Those days are over.
Yeah.
And you're seeing that with an enormous amount of effort to restrict voting access, especially for people of color. But essentially, then you're seeing the gerrymandering that is about really rigging the deck in favor of one side or the other. And you're seeing the efforts on the part of the Trump administration essentially to win the election by deciding who votes. So this is really, really important, and it's been threatened in a way we haven't seen before. But the second thing that's really important to understand is, why is democracy important? You know, for a lot of folks, it's an abstraction, and we haven't had to think about it because we could take it for granted. Mm-hmm. But what's important about a democracy is that it's a system of government where you're entitled to a seat at the table, whether you're in the minority or the majority. And the table you are supposed to have a seat at is the one that does decide what's your environmental policy, what is your healthcare policy. And if you essentially lose that opportunity for your point of view to be represented, and you get someone who then becomes an autocrat, it's what they say, that's what goes. So this is really important for our well-being, because what we're seeing with the autocratic tendencies of the Trump administration is they've got a billionaire agenda. That's essentially what it is. A fossil fuel agenda. That's essentially what it is. And a healthcare agenda where more or less you're on your own.
Absolutely. Well, we couldn't agree more. As you know, that's why we have been campaigning on this exact issue. And
Yeah, thank you.
of course, and I think it's clear that the impacts on our democracy are tremendous. We're seeing it ripple out in so many different directions. And just to put a finer point on some of those impacts, you actually released a report earlier this month indicating that 99.5% of Vermont families are actually going to be worse off due to Trump's economic policies and the Republicans' so-called Big Beautiful Bill. Also within that report, you indicated that up to 45,000 Vermonters will be losing access to health care, $1.7 billion in revenue at Vermont hospitals will be lost, and annual energy bills will rise by $290, and the states will lose 1,400 green jobs.
Right.
Incredibly, tremendously terrible, if you ask me. And that's just some of the highlights of your report. There's much more to be said for that. And so I'm wondering what can be done, if anything, to stop the bleeding, whether that's in Vermont or around the country, specifically as it relates to the healthcare and the energy sectors.
Well, I want to repeal the bill, but that's going to take a long
there,
time.
yeah.
Political work, like starting with the midterm elections are going to be extremely important. There's Republican majority in the Senate, Republican majority in the House. They're rubber stamping what Trump wants. The one big beautiful bill is something they voted for when it's going to have the same impact on the people they represent in those districts as it's had on Vermont. I mean, this is not like it was only bad for Vermont. Mm-hmm. This was really bad for working people across the country, whether they voted for Trump or they voted for Harris. And the point of my report was to make it very concrete so people can assess what they think about this. So I think number one is getting the information out there, because the more people were aware of the specifics in the bill, the more they said, wait a minute, that makes no sense, all right? And that's even true with Republicans. So the reality is, if you're a senator or you're a member of Congress, a House of Representatives, and your voters ask you, wait a minute, you voted to take away my health care and you have no alternative. You voted to increase my utility bills. And this, of course, is at a time when affordability is a real challenge for hardworking Vermonters and Americans. Then you've got some explaining to do. So my goal on the report is to get that information out. And then my political goal is to get enough support in Congress that we can repeal these really dangerous policies.
Well, that would be incredible. And yeah, I guess the fact that there's such a lack of awareness surrounding all of this is troubling. And I appreciate the fact that you're trying to take that head on.
Yeah, and it's hard, the modern news cycle, and Trump has got a kind of feral genius to get in the news. And he's always throwing these wild things out there. We're going to fire somebody on the Fed. He's sending the National Guard and military into cities. There's always something he's doing that takes your eye off the ball.
Absolutely.
And the main thing for the well-being of citizens is we've got to have an economy where they have a shot at having a decent job and having wages where they can pay their bills. The affordability challenge is getting worse under Trump. Grocery prices, vegetable prices, they're going up, utility prices going up. So my goal is to get that information out and then try to have support for a better pro-middle class, pro-environment economic agenda.
Well, thank you for that. I wish you luck. And just speaking back to your report for a moment, we touched a little bit on the fact that energy prices are increasing, green jobs are going down. That's obviously not the end of the story for climate. Unfortunately, we're seeing a lot of it sort of withering away due to Trump's EPA and the intention of just rolling back on climate. What's incredible to me, though, is that you have always been a champion for climate and for holding big oil accountable for all of the climate damages that they have caused. I imagine it's relatively difficult to get a whole lot done in DC, just given the current makeup of the administration, though as you're very much aware, Vermont was the first state in the nation to pass a climate superfund law.
Right.
So I'm wondering, in your opinion, what is the role of the states in addressing climate action and holding these corporations accountable?
You're the leaders now. I mean, that's the bottom line.
Feels good.
There's an iron grip of the fossil fuel industry on the Trump administration. And, they used to claim that it was all of the above energy approach, which included, from their perspective, fossil fuels. But now it's all below, nothing above. Mm-hmm. And wind and solar has been stopped dead in its tracks. And so extreme that this wind project in the Atlantic, where billions of dollars have been spent, where there is an expectation and people counting on getting the energy that's going to be delivered, Trump just unilaterally stopped it. So there's going to be loss of energy access and loss of jobs and an incredible waste of investments. So this is a situation where there's two things going on at once that are very dangerous. One is the total capture by the fossil fuel industry of the Trump administration. But number two, the ideological rigidity, where even with good producing jobs in good clean energy, wind and solar and storage technology, they're ripping those up and tearing them apart. And 95% of the new energy capacity that we've created in the last 5 years has come from wind and solar. It's like good jobs. It is providing us what we need. There's a huge increase in energy demand. And if we take away the capacity of those alternatives, wind and solar and battery technology, to contribute to what we need, you know what that means to the cost of energy that we get through fossil fuels. It goes way, way up, and that means your utility bills, Vermont utility bills go way up. So this is a reckless policy, obviously for the environment, but also for the economy and for the well-being of everyday average families.
Absolutely. So then your recommendation would be for other states to step up and do something.
Absolutely. There's got to be pushback here. And one of the aspects of my job right now that's sad to me, quite frankly, is that I'll have my colleagues who may be Republicans, may be biased towards fossil fuel, but they're in Iowa, where there's an incredible amount of wind energy. They're in Texas, all right, big fossil fuel, but it also produces the most wind energy of any state. So why do they accede to the Trump's irrational and vindictive approach when it's going to hurt the people they represent? And really, the reality is that a lot of my colleagues are more afraid of the revenge of Trump than they are the retaliation or the response of their constituents. That's a real problem that we've got to overcome because I've got to look to my Republican colleagues to stand up, as I see it, for the people they represent, just like obviously that's my job.
Absolutely.
But the states are taking the leadership role because it's worse than there being a vacuum in Washington. There's actually an aggressive pro-fossil fuel, anti-clean energy agenda. And the consequences of the bad weather events and climate change. We had floods on July 10th of 2023, 2024, and isolated but still severe floods on 2025. And those are coming fast and furious, not just in Vermont, but all around the country. And in a lot of places, the cost of insurance is going way up. The ability to get a mortgage is going way down. So this is an extremely important issue for everyday people. And if there's a vacuum or an aggressive resistance in Washington, having states like Vermont step up is absolutely more important. Plus, it's giving folks here and all around the country an opportunity to have a voice when they think Washington is not listening.
Absolutely. Well, then we are grateful to continue doing the work and encouraging others to do that as well. So thank you for that. I want to pivot now for just a moment because there's been a lot going on in recent news that has me feeling a bit troubled, and I'm sure similarly for you as well. And in your role as U.S. Senator, you have advocated for a limited use of military force within the U.S. government. What we're seeing today is President Trump is deploying the National Guard in Washington, D.C., despite the fact that crime rates are actually lower, and also despite the fact that during the January 6th riots, there was no federal troops deployed, but that's
Right.
maybe best served for a different conversation. But at this point in time, Trump is now saying that after D.C., he plans to also deploy to New York, Chicago, and possibly Baltimore. So from your perspective, what are you seeing right now in D.C., and are you concerned about these ongoing actions?
Well, I'm very concerned, but it's important to take a step back because crime is an issue. And any crime is something we want to address
Sure, yeah.
and forcefully. because we want safe communities. So this question of Trump sending military in, you have to ask your question, is this on the level? Is this about crime or is it about something else?
Right.
He's trying to make it look as though we don't care about crime, and we absolutely do. The safety of our citizens has to be first and foremost the responsibility of government, and local government and state government are the ones that have the primary obligation to do that. All right? But what they're doing in Washington is a couple of things. One, federalizing it and making a big show. But number two, I got to say, with what you see with Trump, and we were talking earlier about voter suppression, is this a prelude to his ability to deploy troops in blue states and in blue cities for the next election? And, you know, if you had asked me a year or two ago, would I ever suggest that? The answer would have been no. And it goes back to my earlier point that all of us have been entitled, actually, to take for granted that there would be non-interference in our elections. That's not the case now. And if you notice, the deployments he's talking about are all in blue cities. So there's a different agenda than crime. He's trying to jam us politically to suggest that we don't care when we deeply care about crime. And we deeply care about having good, solid law enforcement, especially led locally. But we also know that what he says and what he does are oftentimes two different things. So I'm very concerned about the use of troops in our cities.
Absolutely. And so just to clarify, is it true then that you see this as somewhat of a case study for what could happen come election time?
Well, no, I do.
Okay.
I do.
Okay.
And that's, honestly, I hate to say that,
Yeah.
right? Because I grew up at a time, I mean, I got involved in politics when I was in college, and I saw what was going on in the civil rights movement. And of course, black people in the South were not allowed to vote. And John Lewis was my colleague in Congress for a number of years, and of course a revered person who fought for the rights of people to vote. And he knows and was with people who died trying to defend that right to vote. And that's why it's so essential to the whole point of democracy. You can't have democracy without free access to voting. And you know, you do have the history of President Trump on January 6th calling the mob in, basically looking the other way, celebrating the people who attacked the Capitol, beat up police on January 6th, pardoned them, and is now firing law enforcement people who were assigned duty to prosecute those people, and he let them out of prison. So am I worried? The answer is yes.
Okay. That's completely fair. I appreciate your honesty there. What I do appreciate, though, on a more positive side of things, is that you are deeply well-rounded in the work that you do, and you care deeply for a variety of issue areas, which I deeply respect. And so something that we haven't talked about or touched on yet is that of immigration. Mm-hmm. And so you have been, long time, a strong advocate for comprehensive immigration reform. And more specifically, perhaps creating an immigration system that treats immigrants and refugees with the dignity and the respect that they not only deserve, but are entitled to within this process. And so something I would love to touch on is actually the fact that you met with Mohsen Madawi back on April 21st. This was during the time where he was being detained at the Northwest State Correctional Facility over in St. Albans. And so those who possibly may have missed the coverage that we did earlier on Mohsen Madawi, he is originally from the West Bank. He is a Palestinian man who has come to the United States. He has been here since 2014 and is a legal resident of Windsor County. And so you had the opportunity to meet with him back when he was being detained. And I'm really interested in hearing maybe what your biggest takeaway was from that meeting.
Well, and first of all, I think there's two related but separate issues. One is immigration, mm-hmm. and then second is what's going on in Gaza. Immigration was used against him to try to deport him because he was protesting what was going on in Gaza, all right? And what I think is going on in Gaza is horrible. Over 60,000 Palestinians, innocent Palestinians, not related to the horrible Hamas attack on October 7th, but just people trying to live their lives. Women and children have been killed. There's a famine in Gaza, and we're arguing about with the Israeli government, the Netanyahu government, whether there's, quote, a famine or not. Well, we know there is, whatever word you want to call it. And a lot of young people, a lot of Americans are really appalled by the suffering in Gaza. And many students, including Muslim Madawi, protested that. So I do think that it's time for the United States to get real on this. And should we be sending arms to Israel that are being used in Gaza? My view is absolutely not. No. What happened to Madawi was that the immigration system was then used basically to try to deport him, not because he committed any crime, not because he did anything wrong, but because of his political views. Now, my takeaway from my visit with Mosen, he's an extraordinary person. Because what I saw in him, in a way, is similar to some of the qualities I saw in early civil rights leaders. They knew about suffering, but they were generous and forgiving. And he also was talking, when I visited with him, clearly about the loss of life of the Palestinians in Gaza. But he was appalled at what Hamas did and the suffering that Israelis had experienced as well. And his was a hope of being able to live peacefully together, which ultimately is where we have to get. So I found him to be quite extraordinary because he was picked up really arbitrarily because he expressed views that are similar to many of us in Congress, that there should be a ceasefire. But he was subject to deportation with the Trump agenda. So I think it's both immigration and the concern about the loss of life in Gaza.
I see. That totally makes sense, and really appreciate that you were able to go and meet with him and to spread this message of peace, because I agree we should all learn how to live peacefully with one another.
Right.
And so appreciate you sort of lifting that up for us today. I'll also mention that we've covered a lot of heavy topics and we've kind of ping-ponged around. I appreciate you for being a team player on all of that, but I do also want to give you a chance to uplift anything that you might be particularly proud of, because you've worked on a lot of legislation in Washington, and just 2025 alone, you've sponsored 191 pieces of legislation and co-sponsored 360. So are there any that you feel like you might want to mention here today?
Well, you know, one of the ones that I got involved in very early was the burn pit legislation. Mm-hmm. You know, in Iraq and Afghanistan, Vermonters in the National Guard suffered more losses on a per capita basis than any other state. And one of the ways some of our soldiers died was they were stationed near what were called burn pits. And burn pits are what they sound. They were just open air incinerators. Chemicals went in there, gas went in there, oils went in there, toxic materials went in there. And they breathed these fumes, and it turned out when they got home, they thought they were safe, but they weren't. They got cancer and they died. And a couple of widows of a couple of our wonderful service members got very active in trying to stop this. And that they wanted to get rid of the burn pits. And I met with them. And then, unbeknownst to me, widows in other parts of the country were meeting with their members of Congress. And we sponsored legislation to get rid of these burn pits. And it was all the leadership of the widows here in Vermont and elsewhere that was so instrumental in helping us get that passed. So I'm proud of that. But really, I'm proud of it because it was a response to the leadership of Vermonters who lost their husbands and didn't want to see this happen to other families. Mm-hmm. And their determination ultimately led to us being able to pass this legislation to essentially ban burn pits. Wow,
yeah, that's incredible. Something I think maybe not enough people know about, and such an environmental health and toxics issue.
Pardon me, that's right.
Which, as you know, is something that we work very closely on.
I do know that.
Absolutely a public interest issue. So really glad that you were able to highlight that and move us in a good direction on it, because that is absolutely tragic. So thank you for your work.
Thank you.
As we close out today, again, I know you're short on time, so I'm wondering if you have any final messages or words from your Vermont constituents, and also how they can keep in touch with you and other members of the federal delegation.
Well, keeping in touch with us is pretty easy. Just go to our websites, welch.senate.gov. And we like to hear from Vermonters. We get lots of mail, lots of calls, and we've got a big staff that is really dedicated to providing service to Vermonters. Second, I get out and around as much as I can because it really is the best part of my job, listening to Vermonters. But third, I think the question all of us are asking, whether you serve in the Senate or you're working at VPIRG, you're raising your family, is what can I do to help make a difference? And first and foremost, I think acting locally is more important than ever. You know, we go back to your question about should there be state leadership because there's a vacuum or a hostility in Washington, say, to clean energy initiatives? The answer is yes. Acting locally, you've got some power. Second, acting locally means you're going to work with other people, and you can just tune out Trump for a while, tune out just the chaos in Washington, and think about how, by collaborating with people who share your vision of building a better state and a better community, working together, you can make things better here. I think that adds up over time. And I also think that engagement is so essential to our own personal well-being, because every Vermonter I meet is pretty generous, and they feel that it's been a good day when they were able to help somebody out. They feel it's a good day when they made their kids a little more secure. So with all of the pressure and all of the chaos and all of the collapse of norms, it doesn't mean we have to collapse our own standards and our own sense of spirit and generosity towards those around us. So keep hanging in your summer, VPIRG Democracy Summer is a good example of just plunging in locally and doing it.
Well, thank you. It feels really good to be doing that work. We're going to keep at it. I know you're going to keep at it. So thank you, Senator Welch, for taking the time and for all of the work you're doing in Vermont and DC.
And well, thank you as well.
Thank you. Take care.
And that is the end of our very special episode. Our sincere gratitude to U.S. Senator Peter Welch for joining our show today. It's not often that you get to feature a member of Vermont's federal delegation, and we are so grateful to have had that opportunity.
Yeah,
If you liked this episode, be sure to like, comment, share, subscribe, and rate us 5 stars. If you have questions or ideas for future episodes, you can reach out to me at jhayden@vpirg.org. Special thanks, as always, to my co-producer, Elijah Cushion, Town Meeting TV, for hosting us today while we revamp our usual studio space. I'm Jordan Hayden, and this is Vermont's Voice. Take care and talk soon.